Before he was the most controversial figure in NASCAR history, Smokey Yunick was a farm boy from Neshaminy, Pennsylvania, with a head full of ideas and hands that never stopped moving. Born in 1923, he dropped out of high school early and made his way through life not with formal education, but with instinct, grit, and one of the most inventive mechanical minds the racing world had ever seen. He flew B-17 bombers in World War II, surviving missions over Nazi Germany. That experience shaped everything about him: his fearlessness, his stubbornness, and his obsession with precision under pressure. After the war, Smokey settled in Daytona Beach, Florida, long before it became the epicenter of American stock car racing. He opened a garage with a bold name: Smokey's Best Damn Garage in Town. And he meant it. From the moment it opened, word spread that Smokey wasn't just another wrench turner. He was a problem solver, a rule bender, and a man who believed the laws of physics were more negotiable than most people realized. He didn't look like a genius. With his ever-present cowboy hat, cigar clenched in his teeth, and a vocabulary that could blister paint off a fender, Smokey looked more like a backwoods hustler than a motorsports engineer. But when it came to racing, he was ahead of his time, by miles. Smokey wasn't afraid to call out NASCAR, break convention, or challenge authority. He once said, "Rules are for people who don't know what they're doing." And in the world of stock car racing, where speed, innovation, and secrecy were everything, that made him both feared and admired. Before long, his name was on every racetrack whisper list, not for his wins, but for the rumors surrounding how he won. Smokey Yunick wasn't just a mechanic. He was the man NASCAR couldn't control. Smokey Yunick didn't just read the rule book, he studied it like a legal contract. Every vague line, every technical gap, every sentence missing a period. To him, that was an opportunity. In the early days of NASCAR, regulations were thin and interpretations even thinner. Officials focused on what was written, but Smokey zeroed in on what wasn't. One of his earliest victories came with a Hudson Hornet, which he had meticulously modified under the guise of legality. While other mechanics tuned their engines by ear, Smokey was already applying aerodynamic theory, balancing weight distribution, and optimizing fuel burn. His genius wasn't just in the wrench, it was in the way he saw the car as a complete system. He realized you didn't need to break the rules to win. You just had to understand them better than the people writing them. His tactics quickly attracted scrutiny. He was accused, often correctly, of running cars with hidden advantages: oversized intake manifolds, lighter frames masked with ballast, suspension tweaks that defied gravity. But when inspectors tried to disqualify him, Smokey would point to the rule book and ask, "Where does it say I can't do that?" He wasn't cheating. Not in his eyes. He was simply smarter. NASCAR's early officials weren't ready for a guy like Smokey Yunick. They were still operating under the assumption that teams would play fair. Smokey laughed at the idea. In his world, racing was war, and war favored the cunning. Soon, his name became a legend. Whispers in the paddock said, "If Smokey's car looks normal, it's hiding something." He never denied it. In fact, he embraced it. Because for Smokey Yunick, bending the rules wasn't dishonorable. It was a form of art. In 1968, Smokey Yunick pulled off what is still considered the most infamous stunt in NASCAR history. At the center of the controversy, an 18-foot-long fuel line. Here's how it worked. NASCAR had strict rules about how much fuel a car could carry, 22 gallons max. But Smokey, being Smokey, found a loophole. The rule said nothing about how long the fuel line could be between the tank and the engine. So he designed one that snaked through the frame of the car, holding an extra 5 gallons of fuel. That meant one of Smokey's Chevys could run longer between pit stops than any other car on the track. In racing, every second counts, and this gave him minutes. When officials caught wind of it, they tried to disqualify the car. They removed the fuel tank entirely, but Smokey, unfazed, fired up the engine anyway and drove off without it. The scene is legendary. He reportedly said, "You forgot 10 things wrong with that car," lit a cigar, and left the officials dumbfounded. It wasn't just a mechanical win. It was psychological warfare. Smokey didn't just beat other drivers. He beat NASCAR at its own game. After that, NASCAR rewrote the rulebook, not to improve competition, but to stop one man. But for every new rule they added, Smokey found another gap. And that moment, when a car ran with no fuel tank, cemented his place as either the sport's greatest innovator or its greatest menace. Smokey Yunick had a philosophy that summed up his career. "It ain't cheatin' if it ain't in the rulebook." That phrase became folklore in NASCAR, passed around garages like gospel. But Smokey didn't mean it as a joke. He genuinely believed that racing should reward ingenuity, not obedience. If the officials failed to anticipate something, that was their problem. In interviews, he doubled down. "I didn't break the rules," he'd say. "I just bent them until they screamed." To Smokey, rules were like rubber. They stretched. His cars weren't designed just to win. They were puzzles built to be misunderstood. He'd run engines with reversed cooling flows to improve performance, manipulate aerodynamics using handmade panels, and even drill holes in roll cages to reduce weight, then fill them with rubber plugs to hide the trick. Each time NASCAR caught him, it was already too late. He'd already proven his point, and sometimes won the race. But his philosophy raised a bigger question. Where is the line between innovation and cheating? Smokey didn't just straddle that line, he erased it. Other teams started copying his tricks. NASCAR tightened regulations, but the myth of Smokey Yunick grew larger than the sport. He was the outlaw genius, the guy who showed the world that the greatest tool in racing wasn't a wrench. It was a mind that never stopped testing limits. To many, he was a cheater. To others, he was a hero. But to Smokey, he was just doing his job. Among Smokey Yunick's most legendary and debated feats was the creation of what fans still call the 7/8 scale Chevelle. The story goes like this. NASCAR had strict body specs, but Smokey discovered that the templates used to measure cars were based on key dimensions, not a full physical mold. So, what did he do? Allegedly, he built a Chevelle that was slightly smaller in every direction, just enough to escape visual detection, but enough to reduce drag and weight. The genius? It still passed inspection. It hugged the corners tighter. It accelerated faster. It sliced through air more efficiently than any car on the track. NASCAR officials were stunned by how well it performed, but couldn't quite figure out why. No rule had been technically broken, at least not then. Some still argue whether this car truly existed. Photos are rare, and Smokey, always enjoying the fog of legend, never fully confirmed or denied it. But even the possibility that he could shrink an entire stock car without anyone noticing became part of Smokey's mythos. One mechanic close to Yunick said it best. That car was like racing a shadow. It didn't make sense how fast it was, until you realized you weren't racing a car. You were racing a genius. Whether myth or reality, the 7/8 Chevelle became a symbol of just how far Smokey Yunick would go to prove that creativity, not compliance, was the real horsepower. Smokey Yunick wasn't just a thorn in NASCAR's side, he was a full-blown headache. As his reputation for bending rules grew, so did the tension between him and the NASCAR brass. He'd openly mock their intelligence, challenge their decisions, and once called the inspection crew a bunch of monkeys with a checklist. Not exactly diplomatic. Officials, in turn, targeted Smokey like a hawk. His cars were subject to extra scrutiny, torn apart bolt by bolt at every event. Sometimes they'd hold him for hours, desperately searching for something, anything that could justify disqualification. More often than not, they came up short. But Smokey didn't back down. He doubled down. He wrote letters to Bill France Sr., NASCAR's founder, criticizing the sport's direction. He accused officials of favoritism, incompetence, and occasionally hinted at manipulated race outcomes. His garage wasn't just a workshop, it was a war room. The feud peaked when NASCAR began implementing rules clearly aimed at Smokey's tactics. They even revised the fuel line regulations in response to his infamous 18-foot trick. Yet every time they closed a loophole, Smokey found 3 more. He didn't see it as war, he saw it as a game, and he was always 3 moves ahead. But the constant surveillance took a toll. Smokey began to feel less like a competitor and more like a criminal under watch. And when the inspectors became more concerned with the man than the machine, the joy started to fade. Still, Smokey never stopped fighting, because to him, the only thing worse than losing was losing to bureaucracy. If you stripped away the controversy, the bravado, and the headline-grabbing stunts, what you found at the heart of Smokey Yunick was simple: a mechanical savant. Smokey wasn't just some backwoods rule bender. He was an innovator decades ahead of his time. He pioneered reverse-flow cooling systems that made engines run cooler and more efficiently. He created variable-length intake manifolds that adjusted performance in real time. He tinkered with suspension geometry, weight distribution, and even experimented with aerodynamics before wind tunnels became standard. NASCAR may have viewed him as a nuisance, but other racing disciplines? They saw a profit. IndyCar teams, engineers from Detroit, even aircraft designers came to Smokey for advice. His garage became a temple where rules didn't exist, only physics, creativity, and results. Smokey was one of the first in stock car racing to treat the vehicle like a complete ecosystem, not just an engine bolted to a frame. Some of his designs were so advanced, they were banned before they ever hit the track. Others were quietly adopted years later, without credit. When asked why he never patented his innovations, Smokey simply said, "I didn't do it to make money, I did it because it was the right answer." His workshop may have looked like chaos: oil-stained floors, chalkboard sketches, half-dismantled engines, but it was a lab. And Smokey? He was the mad scientist of motorsports. By the late 1960s, NASCAR had had enough. Smokey Yunick's cars were winning races, yes, but more importantly, they were making a mockery of the rulebook. The sanctioning bodies started creating regulations almost entirely to contain him. Every innovation he unveiled was followed by a rewritten rule, almost like a game of engineering whack-a-mole. Smokey's response? Bring it on. He once said, "They can't write rules fast enough to keep up." And for a while, he was right. But the climate shifted. NASCAR wasn't just banning tricks anymore, it was banning Smokey himself. Track officials subjected his cars to ludicrous inspections, pulling fuel lines, tearing apart engines, even questioning legal parts just to keep him from racing. The relationship soured. And yet, something unexpected happened. The more NASCAR fought Smokey, the more they validated his brilliance. Rule after rule was added to patch the holes he exposed. holes no one even knew existed until he showed up. In trying to stop him, they were building the modern framework of NASCAR safety and fairness on top of his designs. His legacy wasn't just in race wins, it was in the very DNA of the sport. But Smokey didn't want to play defense. He wasn't interested in being a compliance officer. And so, the rebel began to step back, watching a sport he helped shape slowly turn corporate, rigid, and less fun. "They banned my cars," he once quipped, "but they had to write a whole new damn rule book to do it." By the 1970s, Smokey Yunick had grown tired, not of racing, but of fighting. He was no stranger to controversy, but now the game felt personal. Every new build became a battle. Every race weekend turned into an interrogation. And for a man who loved racing more than fame, the toll finally caught up. He walked away. He didn't hold a press conference. There was no retirement ceremony. He just stopped showing up. NASCAR didn't push to get him back. And Smokey, he didn't ask for a goodbye. Instead, he poured his time into his writing. His autobiography, Best Damn Garage in Town, pulled no punches. He named names. He told stories of corruption, favoritism, and hypocrisy. And he laid bare the real reason he left. The racing was never the problem. It was the people running it. Even in his later years, living quietly in Daytona Beach, he never stopped inventing. Smokey remained a consultant for manufacturers, military outfits, and aerospace companies. His mind never stopped engineering, even as his hands grew still. When asked if he regretted leaving NASCAR, he paused, lit a cigar, and said, "They needed me more than I ever needed them." So, what was Smokey Yunick really? To the NASCAR brass, he was a headache. To fans, he was a legend. To mechanics, he was a god. But to history, he remains one of the most polarizing figures in motorsports. His name still sparks debates. Was he a cheater who undermined the sport? Or a genius who forced it to grow up? In truth, Smokey blurred the line. He didn't just exploit rules, he exposed their flaws. He wasn't breaking the sport, he was revealing where it was broken. Modern engineers owe him more than they'd admit. Many safety regulations, design improvements, and competitive standards can trace their roots to problems Smokey identified, then solved in his own rebellious way. And maybe that's the point. Smokey Yunick didn't want to be loved. He wanted to be respected. He wanted to race the right way, his way. And when that no longer fit NASCAR's mold, he left with his legacy intact. He may have bent every rule in the book, but he never faked who he was. And in the end, that might be the most honest thing anyone in racing ever did.